Howdy. It's Cody, here with my Pure Malice deck profile. Took this to our Legends Sports and Games locals last night and went completely undefeated. Matchups were Sky Striker Malice into White Forest Azamina Fiendsmith into Fiendsmith Ryzeal, Fiendsmith Ryzeal. All in all, deck is really, really reliable and consistent. I think this is honestly the better way to play this deck, and I will go more in depth with what kind of changes I make from what seems to be the standard thought and experience with the deck. So just going into the main deck, 40 card main deck, of course, you need to be as consistent as possible with what you're playing. So we will lay out that whole Malice engine first. These are all the Malice cards, of course, and we'll talk about each one individually as needed. Dormouse at 3, White Rabbit at 3 doesn't need to be discussed really. Cat at 2 is something I've considered moving up to 3 just to have that ninth name in the main deck. It matters with like more grindy situations where like you are using MTP multiple times because you do need a Malice in deck at all times for MTP to be live. Also, a Malice name with a Bestial will get you full combo in this build just on its own, which is very, very powerful. So a third cat is tempting. It's just a really bad name and not really a good name for like top decking. So it's not the one you particularly want to see all the time, but there might be room for it, especially with how unimportant Dotscaper has ended up being for me. Because this is really like your red ransom line, and I don't do red ransom turn 1 most times. It's only really when you get interrupted really heavily that you need to go into red ransom, and as such, that's the only time you really need the Dotscaper. But I think Dotscaper does need to remain in the deck because of those lines existing. So as much as I want to cut this card, you kind of can't. 3 underground, 1 terraforming. This is the best way to start your turn. Not having to commit your normal summon until later in the combo is very, very powerful. Especially like if you already have like a Malice name or multiple Malice names in hand and underground, you can go like underground for Dormouse, for Cheshire Cat, banish the Malice from hand, and you still haven't normal summon, but you've used all of your Malice names at that point. So anything else is just like extra credit. So this card is really, 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 really good. Terraforming, of course, has to be there because this is like the best card in the deck, honestly. And the battle phase stuff is really relevant too. Like the attack boost as well as forcing your opponent to attack Malice Link monsters. It protects things like your SP. It can nullify Nibiru if you went through it ransom. 5300 as a stat line is really, really hard for Ryzeal to deal with as well. The biggest monster they can really do is Chaos Angel, which is 3500, and its banish effect isn't going to help because the Malice monster is just going to come back. So this card is very, very nice to see. I'm also on 3 Allure of Darkness. I think card advantage is the number one thing for this format. We're very like resource intensive, grind intensive format, so you want as many cards to play as possible, and Allure does that for you. That being said, this card does come out games 2 and 3 to counteract its weakness to Lancia. The idea with playing the 3 Allure main deck is just to make sure that you're as likely as possible to win game 1, because I think draw 2, special summon 1 from hand is such a powerful effect that puts you so far ahead that oftentimes this is going to win you a game without even really realizing that it's Allure of Darkness that won you the game. But this just combos really, really well with the non-engine suite that we're playing, as well as just the Malice engine itself. Then, of course, you need more ways to start playing, so Gold Sark is here as well, acting as like a 5th copy of Field Spell, essentially. And then 1 of each Malice Trap, of course. You do want to play at least 1 of each. Playing 2 of any of these is like sort of tempting, but you'd really only probably play 2 TB11 just because of its utility protecting your like normal summons. But the way I play this deck, you don't really need to protect the normal summon as much. So, 1 of each is fine, and I don't think many builds would really consider playing more than 1 of this card. So that is the Malice engine, 20 cards. So the last half of the deck is all non-engine, which is, again, like a big, big, big benefit of this deck, especially with Allure, is you're able to draw into so much non-engine, and then just like leverage that to stop your opponent's play lines and use the Malice engine for its recursive ability, its advantage generation, all the bodies that you get off of it, and then like quick, low commitment OTK lines. So 3 Shifter, this card just dunks on the format. Like the only deck that doesn't care about this in the format is basically Malice. There's some people still playing Ritual Beast as well, where obviously you don't care about Shifter on Ritual Beast, but every other deck in the format hates Shifter. Like even Ryzeal Pure doesn't appreciate Shifter because it's turning off Ext, Ice, Node. All those effects can't activate under Shifter, and they're usually just making Detonator pass, and you're able to deal with Detonator pass most times. So Shifter is really good. 3 Nibiru. I was not on this card for a while, but I realized an inconsistency in my logic regarding the card and put it back in, and have since loved the card. The thing that I thought made Nibiru bad is that you need it paired for it to be impactful enough into most of the top decks. Like, Malice had lines that beat Nibiru on its own, and Ryziel can usually go through Fiendsmith combo to bait the Nibiru and then keep playing afterwards anyway. So in my eyes, Nibiru wasn't good enough because of that reason. But more realistically, no single non-engine piece is good enough on its own to do the work that it needs to do. So you want cards that are good when paired, and like Shifter and Nib are two examples of cards that are very, very good paired. Detonator Pass under Shifter is something that Ryziel is basically always going to be able to do anyway, but if you can pair Shifter with, Imperm or Book of Eclipse, all of a sudden you're just killing them. And that's something that I have done multiple times. It's just like Shifter them, out the Detonator with an Eclipse or an Imperm, and then go Hearts of Crypt or OTK line, which is very simple, nib safe, and everything. So discounting Nibiru because of its requirement to have another interruption on top of it was incorrect on my part, and makes it a very good card because of how the deck is built with 20 non-engine in it. You're almost always going to see Nibiru paired, so it's always going to be a relevant card. Besides that, we have kind of the generics, Ash and Imperm. These cards are just always applicable. Even into Malice, these cards are decent enough. Like, Ash can hit their draw effects or engage, or like the Engraver line can be hit by Ash as well. You can also hit Whitebinder Reborn effect. You can hit MTP to stop the non-target banish. You can hit TB11 to put them off of a body. A lot of surprising applications for Ash Blossom still, and also Book of Eclipse is in everybody's list as well. So going second into Eclipse, Ash can save you a lot of the time. Or alternatively, if your hand has to play into Fuolos really heavily, Ash helps there as well. But I don't think Charmies are actually that threatening for this deck, which is a big reason to play this deck. Besides that, Eclipse, this card is absolutely phenomenal. It deals with so many problems that you don't expect. Against Fiendsmith Ryziel round 3 of the local, I drew into this off of my Allure, and they had established a Chaos Angel at that point, so I Allured, banished a Malice, chain 1 Malice effect, chain 2 Book of Eclipse, outs their whole board, and then my Malice hits the board afterwards, and I get to play, and the Chaos Angel is dealt with. As mentioned as well, the Ryziel end board is almost always soft to this card. It's not always losing to this card, but it's usually very weak to Eclipse, so that is its inclusion in the main deck as the silver bullet against Ryziel that you need to have this format. It's also good into the Fiendsmith stuff, whether they make Caesar or they make Desiree, Book of Eclipse answers it. Because with Desiree in particular, if the equip falls off because it was set face down, it no longer has a link monster equip, so it can't negate anything. So you can hold Eclipse, try and play spell cards to force that effect, and then if they Desiree your spell, you just Eclipse, and you're chilling. Last 5 cards are 5 Bestials, because these cards are engine and non-engine. Bestial plus Malice name. You can link the Malice name into either Lingeribo or Link Decoder, depending on situation. If you're scared of trap cards, you can go Lingeribo first, and then banish the Malice name with your Bestial, and then you have 3 bodies to go right into a Whitebinder. Or you can go right into Cryptor, depending on circumstance again. This also hits the Fiendsmith line, it hits Plugin, it will hit Twins of the Eclipse when that comes out as well. These cards are just going to be very, very valuable. And together with Nibiru, the concept of putting a body on board before you even start your plays going second is valuable enough on its own to justify these cards. To the point where I want to try and fit Phantasme somewhere in the list as well, because it does the same thing of establishing a body before you start playing your turn. Because oftentimes you'll lose if your opponent is able to keep you off of bodies. So having the extra 1 or 2 bodies before you start playing helps you play through interruption more. So I really highly value hand traps that summon themselves. We'll go into extra deck here. Of course, we have 1 of each Malice monster. You can consider doubling up on any of these, honestly. I was running 2 Whitebinder for a long time. Just additional ways of playing through interruptions. You can get your Whitebinder impermed, and then you can just make a second one if you're not able to banish the Whitebinder for whatever reason, and then set the trap card off of that second copy. Or Unicorn was very popular for a little bit, where the threat of banishing a Whitebinder or a Cryptor was very real, because those cards are very good. But all things considered, this extra deck has too many threats for Unicorn to hit for it to actually be impactful enough, and people are also just moving away from the Cacheteer cards in general, realizing that they're not impactful enough into this format. So I think 1 of each is totally reasonable at this point. But as said, you could play multiples and it wouldn't be incorrect. Even Red Ransom, if you want to continue going for Red Ransom turn 1 plays, just having the Red Ransom for your turn 3 is really valuable. It's a way to completely get back in the game, because adding field spells that strong. And there's not always a guarantee that you can get this banished from your graveyard, and also putting it in graveyard for your opponent to Bestial is very risky. So I don't like making Red Ransom for those reasons. And also just the susceptibility to Nibiru and just like unforeseen circumstances in general make Red Ransom very risky. Besides that, we'll go into like pretty much just generic extra deck stuff from here. 1 Decoder, 1 Lingo. These are more cards that you could double up on, honestly. Both of these have their applications. Like playing into boards, Lingo is usually a little bit nicer because it can like check imperms. In the mirror, it can check like all the Malice Trap cards. It can check Impulse. Lingo is very, very nice. Even on end boards, sometimes people are on evenly randomly, and Lingo helps against evenly. Then Decoder, of course, is just like free bodies, which is the name of the game here. Then we have Splash and Lizardos. You do need to play these cards. I avoid making them as much as possible, honestly, because they feel like very weak cards. More so Splash Mage feels weak than Lizardos, but I don't particularly like making either of these. I would rather just like go straight into the Malice monsters if I can, and usually the hands provided by the deck allow you to do that. It's just if you get interrupted in weird spots or you open weak hands that you need to go into these guys. We have double SP. There are times where you do have to go through the Lizardos line, which means making Red Ransom. And the better way to utilize Red Ransom is to SP it from graveyard. And because of that, I do want 2 SP in the deck somewhere. This is also just a good card for a grind game where like you can convert random bodies into banishing White Binder to banish your graveyard and Soul Charge. So having extra SPs is very nice. Similarly, like IP to make SP after being Nibiru'd is a relevant thing. So I do have IP here. I don't have Link Spider in the list right now just because I don't see the need for it at any real point. I think IP is just the better option for like a nib fallback plan, inevitably, because usually you'll still have your trap card in play or you'll have a Bestial in hand or something to make IP live. So it's very rare that I have to go into the IP, but I think the insurance policy is there, and that's really what a lot of these cards are, is just insurance policies. Like all of these are just safety things, so that if something happens that you didn't expect or you get interrupted in an awkward way, you still have play lines through those interruptions. Nightmare Phoenix, this paired with Druis Worm can deal with the full Ryziel board because any like excess body plus Druis can go into Phoenix. Phoenix can pin Ryziel Cross, and then Druis can be chain link 1 to send a detonator. So they would have to negate the Phoenix with Cross, and then Druis Worm is guaranteed to go through at that point. So that's a pretty powerful play line. It helps as well with how many Bestials you're playing, where you can just normal Malice, not use effect, go straight into Phoenix, and then Bestial your Malice after the fact. Especially because a lot of the time they'll pop the Phoenix, and then they won't have Bestial interruption options because you no longer control monsters. But together with that, we also have Dark, where if you like Nibiru them and then Bestial them afterwards as well, you can make a Dark with those 2 bodies, not commit your normal summon. And then if they detonator pop to get usefulness out of that detonator before it gets sent by Druis Worm, they pop your Dark and then you add a Malice monster and then you can normal Malice and do your full combo. So I think these 2 cards especially are not in a lot of people's lists, but should be. These cards are phenomenal. I absolutely love that they're in here. Going along with that, we have Lina as well. This was more conceptually like Nibiru is very, very common in the format, and with Nibiru in my main deck itself, I'm more able to make Lina. And if I'm able to put a detonator in graveyard, I can then steal that detonator and then use it as my own to stop their own play lines. It hasn't come up yet, but this last extra deck slot is more of a flex spot where you could play like any of the double ups that I mentioned earlier. Like you could play second Lingo, second Decoder, second Binder, Cryptor, whatever, and be totally fine with that. You could play Cerberus in this point. You could play Nightmare Unicorn. Security Dragon's another option you could think about. There's just a lot of things you could do with this slot. But I want to try Lina at the very least. Last 2 cards, of course, ACC Code. Usually this is to force a Nibiru, more so than it is to actually do the kill shot itself, because Cryptor plus Trap card is already a pretty good kill shot. But ACC Code doesn't need to be here because of its supreme synergy with the Malice engine. Like this card feels like a Malice card printed 4 years ago, which is insane. Last card is Nightmare Griffin. This, again, plays into the advantage game more than anything. You usually go through a trap card during your combo line, usually TB11, that then Griffin can reset that TB11 and also draw you a card because it's so easy to co-link this card in this deck. Otherwise, it's a floodgate that is relevant against Ryziel. Like, you can set up a board of SP Griffin and sometimes also Lingo, but not always. But even just this will like soft answer the Ryziel follow-up. Like even if they're able to break your board and establish their own, you can SP away the Griffin, and once the turn ends and it comes back to you, you'll have a Griffin on board, which means their detonator is offline as long as the Griffin is on the field. So this is kind of a weird like grind game win condition because you're able to play under Griffin very effectively and Ryziel is not able to play under Griffin effectively. And even just this end board too, like if I get impermed, I can make this end board and be pretty confident that they don't have an imperm for Griffin. and then they have to play under Griffin anyway. Or if they didn't, and I feel like I need Griffin to be able to win because maybe I drew like too many like dead hand traps, like maybe I drew like 2 shifter and want to cycle the shifter out of my hand for another hand trap, then I can make the Griffin line instead of the Cryptor board, and that is totally serviceable, has won me some games for sure. The last thing I'll talk about with the extra deck is the lack of TERAHERTZ. I think TERAHERTZ is a big reason why people aren't playing these 2 cards, because they simply don't have space for them. TERAHERTZ is a weird card where it feels win more most of the time. Where if you're able to make TERAHERTZ, you were probably already winning the game because your opponent didn't have the interruptions for you. Malice is a deck where if it gets playing, it's going to win the game. And making TERAHERTZ is just like more than you need, generally speaking. And if you're not able to make TERAHERTZ, then you have 3 cards in your extra deck that are just never doing anything at all, and that feels pretty bad to me. It also can weigh down your main deck if you try and play Code of Soul. It can discourage you from playing Shifter, which I think is just an auto-win card. TERAHERTZ just doesn't feel worth it in a format like this where you don't have to build the most unbreakable board ever. You just have to be able to outgrind your opponent. And Malice is very, very good at grind game already. So that's about where I'm at with that. We'll look at the side deck now. Got 3 Impulse for the Malice matchup. Along with that, we have the 3 Lancia for the Malice matchup. Crossout, which is always going first, but it also stays in games 2 and 3 against Malice, because obviously you're playing the same deck as them, so you can cross out anything that they try and do, and it is very, very, very powerful in the mirror. So I always put these 12 cards in against Malice, and then I'll put in these 6 cards in against Ryziel, generally speaking. And then any other matchup is just like, as things happen, as they're needed, you can do that. These 3 cards specifically are going in place of the Allures. So I'll pull out side pattern stuff real quick here. So you're siding these 3 out, and usually a Terraforming and a Dotscaper, because you almost never need Dotscaper going second. You're usually trying to kill them. You're not trying to set up red Ransom combos or anything like that. So you're just like cutting down the redundancy of your hands as much as possible, and also reducing your weakness to Lancia as much as possible. And talents oftentimes is just taking place of what Allure does. Like they interrupt you and then you draw 2 and keep playing from there. Or you take a monster and get the body anyway. And Called By is just extra insurance against Lancia. It's also good into Fiendsmith, into Ryziel, into opposing Malice as well, because you can do like Called By on their White Binder in response to GWC, and that turns off the White Binder stuff entirely. Otherwise, let's talk about Xyz Encore a little bit, because this is a choice for sure. Ultimate Slayer is an option in this deck. You have that extra space in the extra deck by not playing TERAHERTZ to just comfortably play a Mirror Logic and make Ultimate Slayer live. The issue is that card doesn't work with Shifter. So you run into the issue of like an anti-synergy. If you were playing Ultimate Slayer plus Shifter, you would only have one of the 2, and I would rather have more cards that pair with Shifter to keep them off of the Fiendsmith cards than anything else. Like, all of your non-engine basically turns off the Fiendsmith portion of the deck. Like, all of these cards just deal with the Fiendsmith portion innately. So you don't need Ultimate Slayer to be able to check, like, Detonator plus Caesar. You just need an on. So, like, this plus any other of these hand traps is still going to answer the full Fiendsmith-Ryziel combo. But if you draw a Shifter, this deals with the entire board on its own, and you kill them guaranteed. So that is much, much, much nicer. Xyz Encore is also good going first and second. So in cases where you're getting Lancia'd, you can just, set a bunch of cards, lean on your non-engine, and then play on the turn 4. That's something that happened 2 or 3 times last night, and it was good enough to get me there. You just really need to trust in your non-engine with this deck, and the best answer to Lancia, in my experience, has just been to try and stop their board as much as possible. And if you do get Lancia, either obviously finding Crossout or Called By is nice, but that's only happening, 40-50% of the time. So the other half the time, you just need to have enough non-engine to be able to stop them from killing you and being able to play another turn. So like post side, you can think with 5 engine cards coming out, and then you can take 1 like less impactful hand trap out. That puts you at 25 non-engine in your main deck at that point. So it's a lot of cards to be able to execute that game plan. And I think that is just about all I have. One thing I do want to do is showcase what the combo line is actually looking like. So I need to fix this main deck very briefly. So a hand like this, 3 non-engine, which is already a good place to be. These are all bodies that establish themselves, and Mag is even 2 bodies on its own. So this is already really strong going second, but going first, You have underground plus allure. Allure, we have 2 darks guaranteed, so it's safe to just allure here. Even if you don't find a Malice card, you're finding more non-engine in that case, and you're doing fine. But if you do find a Malice card, it pairs with underground and gets you exactly what you need. So you can allure, draw 2, find a Malice card, banish the White Rabbit comes back, sets a trap card. So here, I always go for GWC first because you want this card to be on the field regardless of whatever else happens. So it's always important to have this card in rotation. And if your White Binder sticks, you can then establish the TB11 to cycle it. And if they nib it, you can chain the GWC, banish it, and then get it back, and then get the GWC back off the White Binder. So you're always safe in that regard. The only way you don't get this card in this kind of a situation is if they have double imperm, and at which case you're kind of still doing okay. So you can set that, go for underground, banish the Dormouse. Dormouse will banish your cat. And we have 3 bodies without a normal summon, which is exactly where you want to be. You can go Decoder, climb directly into your White Binder, and White Binder and Link Decoder activate in sequence. I'll usually banish these 2 names and keep the White Rabbit in grave. You can also consider banishing the Allure to make your Shifter more likely to be live if you do draw into one. But that does communicate that you're not playing striker cards because you're banishing a spell from your own grave. So game 1 you can choose to just leave the Allure there. It usually doesn't matter to find the Shifter in the end. So we're at this point. White Binder now sets TB11. And then you can TB11 the White Binder away. I usually get the second cat out of the deck because it's the worst top deck. And then White Binder comes back and draws a card. So draws into an Ash. So even just here, we have 4 non-engine that we're holding alongside GWC plus White Binder, so we have follow-up, and we can link all these down into a Hearts of Cryptor. And if we didn't have a mag in hand, we could end on Cryptor alone, and you have Cryptor plus the White Binder to set MTP, so you have 2 non-target banishes, 4 non-engine, plus a Nibiru. I don't think most decks are playing through that. You need very, very, very good hands to beat this, and usually even very good hands will lose to this end board. But we also have Mag, so we can summon Mag, banishing just that cat, which is usually fine. Mag on summon to search during the end phase. You can link these 2 away for the SP. You can SP banish the Cryptor. If they nib here and your SP goes away, you still have Cryptor, and then Cryptor can answer their nib token, and you're doing fine. You just have nib plus Cryptor in the end. And if they try and wait to nib here, you still have SP to manage these 2 off. And even if they have like nib plus imperm and they imperm the SP in that case, sure, these 2 go away, but you always have GWC for White Binder to banish Cryptor plus White Rabbit. And then these 2 come back, you get everything anyway. And of course in the end phase we'll have Baldric as well, so we still have those 4 non-engine in our hand, and they're dealing with quite a board. With all this follow-up as well, because again, MTP is adding you follow-up guaranteed. So you always have a Dormouse, if MTP resolves, of course. And if not, they have to try and out the White Binder. Otherwise, the White Binder can reset the MTP, and the MTP can then still get the Dormouse, banish a card on the field, and add a card. And draw a card off the White Binder Reborn. So it's a very low to the ground, very simple combo that you can do pretty much every time, because keep in mind, we didn't even normal summon that line, so even if we got interrupted at some point, we still had a normal summon available to us to push past 1 interruption. And we had the Druid still in hand as well, so we had an extra extender on top of that we can then keep pushing with as well. So like your very engine heavy hands are more there to beat the non-engine that people are playing rather than to extend into TERAHERTZ and do more than you need to. So there are times as well where like my hand will be good enough where I'm comfortable just like not setting a trap card to allow them the impression that they can imperm my Dormouse or imperm my cat or whatever and stop my play lines, and then just keep playing anyway, and I've looped a card out of their hand at that point. So that is the base idea here. And the last thing I want to mention, because I'm not sure I've seen people do this very often, is like, let's, beautiful, put a Shifter in our hand, so we can allure, chain Shifter, draw 2, banish the Rabbit, Rabbit comes down. It's the same line as before. We have the GWC already though, so you can just set MTP raw here. And then from this point, we have the underground for the Dormouse, for the cat. You can just go straight into your Cryptor here. That's 4 summons. You can set these and pass on that. In the event that you went first, or your opponent went first, excuse me, and you shifted them, you can still do this whole combo line, which is what I actually wanted to talk about. So then you can enter battle phase, Cryptor effect in battle phase, putting back, Cheshire Cat, for example. Then banish whatever card, usually a detonator, that they had. Because keep in mind as well, we had an imperm. So we are still very much stopping the detonator from having any say in this. But then Cryptor can banish that. So we have a 3100 attack Cryptor because we resolved Dormouse. We punch for 31. We can then GWC, banish off this Cryptor to summon back. I actually put back the cat, but the cat is usually the best one to keep in this case because it'll be the biggest. It'll be 2100 attack. And then at res, your Cryptor comes back. It's a new monster. It's double attack, so you have 56 plus 21 to attack for, what is that? 31, 21 is 52. You're looking at 1,000 or 10,000 some damage. Just under nib, completely safe, with Shifter in tow. And this is usually how you're beating Ryzeal. It's just like Shifter plus Imperm, Shifter plus Encore, Shifter plus Eclipse. And that is why I think Shifter is the best hand trap for this deck. Is you just kill people out of nowhere, very simply, very straightforward. My round 4 game against Ryzeal Fiendsmith, I just opened Shifter twice and did this line both times. The game was over in 5 minutes. It was disgusting, honestly. So, I hope this helps y'all see the deck in kind of a different light. I think it has a lot of staying power, a lot of potential going forward, and it is just an absolute blast to play in this format as well. You get to do a lot of very good grind game scenarios that have been sorely missing from Yu-Gi-Oh! The last couple of years, where it's kind of look at your opponent's hand, look at your hand, and decide who wins. It's a lot less concrete now, and a lot more whoever manages their resources and stops their opponent better is going to win. And that's a great place for the game to be. Thanks for watching. Until next time.